I think we need to talk about the knowledge problem here, because I think it's something that is derived precisely from these considerations that we have mentioned right now, and is really important not just for education but also for the market, for basically everything. So how would you describe the knowledge problem in, say, a simple way?
The the issue is that we all know different things, and everyone knows different things. Everyone has different wants and desires, and we don't know what others don't knows, and we don't know what we know ourselves even. You can't describe to yourself even how to ride a bicycle. And there's many things that we do that we only discover we can do when we have to do them. And other people know other things. So knowledge is distributed in all of society between millions of people or billions of people. And the amazing thing, what Hayek pointed out or formalized, I think Edmund Burke essentially talks about the same thing in an essay, is that the signaling system in a market economy is money, prices. Yeah, and that's, as he says, is such an astonishing thing that it would, if someone had invented it, it would have been sort of Nobel Prize worthy 10 times over. Everything is collapsed into a number. And that sounds cynical, but you can decide if you have, say, 100 tons of iron, what should you do with the iron? In the Soviet Union, they had no prices, so they didn't know. So should you make nails? Should you make railroad tracks? Should you make screws? Should you do, what is the purpose? What should you do with this? And the price tells you what you can do with it and cannot do with it. And so it is for millions of things. I think, I can't remember the book from the top of my head now. Company of Strangers, it's called. In New York alone, there are 10 billion stock keeping units in the city. There are things that can change price from one day to the next, from 1 hour to the next. And everything is coordinated that way without anyone having to organize a society. And
It's like a
that is
spontaneous order.
a spontaneous order. But I read about, a professor said that this paper, The Use of Knowledge in Society, which Hayek published in 1945, he said he reread it once a year, and he thought he discovered new things every time, because it's 10 pages and it's mind-blowing when you get to it, and it's counterintuitive. People, you don't understand how can you measure something by money? Yeah, but it's a light by which we see in a large society. That's the important thing.
Would you say that this is directly relevant also to the debate about economic calculation that
Exactly.
the Austrians had in the 20s? But was it Mises and Hilferding who were?
Well, von Mises, he said in 1920, I think, in the paper, which for some reason he was a major in the First World War, and somehow he managed to write things anyway. He published this, and he pointed out that Marx had talked about the state going away and everyone would share equally and so on and so forth. There would be no capitalism. And he pointed out that then you can't make economic calculations, because the only prices are decided in the market, and it's exactly this thing. And then a few other economists, socialist economists, they tried to work around that problem in the 1930s, and Hayek wrote 3 papers on it and did the big smackdown. And he used his theory of knowledge being distributed as the basis for it, whilst von Mises used prices as a bit cruder. So I think Hayek's formulation is more thorough, you could say. But essentially what's happened, as far as I can tell, in the economics profession is that, okay, well, moving on, they most economists work for the government in universities, or they work in big banks, and they don't consider the knowledge problem, so they make their beautiful theories anyway.
Sadly, this is the case.
Mm.
Right. So let us now go and talk about education, because I started reading your book, and in the beginning, you make an observation, and I just said, "Wait a minute, this is basically true and brilliant." You said that a lot of people, the knee jerk reaction when people talk about education is that people have an idea of how education should be. They
Mm.
also have an idea of why education has failed, because it deviates from their ideal about how education should be. And they want, in order to see how to improve things, to create a board of experts,
Mm.
and that is going to lay down the principles of reform. But what you observe is that it's almost never the case that the best author of literature is also a professor of literature, that the best musician is also a professor of music,
Mm.
that the best, let's say, trader or something is a professor of economics.
Mm.
So, and I think we can go on forever. So
Well, Elon Musk has had to become a space engineer. He didn't know anything about rockets. He wanted to go fly to Mars, so he had to become a space engineer. Has no degree in that area whatsoever. That's
yeah,
prime
so I
example.
think that this is the main thing we need to tell people. And I also want to ask you about this. What is it precisely you think that is most people's idea of how education reform should come about? And why do you think it's mistaken?
I think most people, um, building on what you said there, have an idea from their own childhood. They saw what seemed to work and what didn't seem to work, and then they think a few more fixes. You should have order in the classroom, and more resources and higher salaries for teachers, and more stringent requirements, and performance league tables, I think they're called in the UK, and so on and so forth. So you measure things, and then you've seen that picture, um, and then a miracle happens, and you get good education. The problem is that there are no such experts that can do it, and it's education is a very complicated area where you talk to people, where you deal with people, and I mean, you can't put the professor of musicology and write the next hit song. It doesn't work like that. It's trial and error, and we think all these. I mean, Mike Tyson said that everyone's got a plan, and then until they get hit in the face, and they have to readjust. And all those beautiful things that people think up when they think they know what education is and how it should be done, when they try them out, they won't quite work, and will be the wrong people and the wrong teaching methods, and so on and so forth. So,
Right. So I think it's really important to draw a distinction here, because it's a distinction that most people don't draw. Is that it's one thing to teach,
yeah.
the skill of teaching is one thing,
Mm.
and quite another to implement educational reform. And a lot of the time, the people who are advocating for really strong education reform along the lines or along statist lines, they seem to me to not be aware of the difference. And they say, sorry.
I think teaching has become, it's like a lot of areas in society has become an academic subject. And whilst it is a trade, it's a craft, how to teach something. You practice makes perfect as a teacher. If and it's been turned into an academic subject with professors of pedagogy and so forth. And something I point out in my book is that you have an area of education which is, when it worked, was based on 2,500 years of trial and error, beginning with the Greeks, the European tradition of teaching. Other countries have other traditions, but it's based on trial and error. And now you turn it into an academic subject. And then you have to get a PhD in teaching. So how do you get a PhD in something? You discover something new. So you have something, how to teach, which you don't need to know how to express how you teach even. You just do it and it works. So you have to come up with a theory that goes away from proven practice, discover something new. So as soon as you get a PhD, you can basically be certain that anyone with a PhD in pedagogy has sort of discovered something that doesn't work or deviates from proven practice. That's
But they haven't found something that actually works.
well, they are not tested on that. I mean, I don't know how it is in Britain, but here in Sweden, someone made a study and said that 2 to 3% of PhDs in education were based on used empirical data. 97-98% did not use empirical data, but they got their PhDs anyway.
What the idea I wanted to push forward with what I said before in the distinction is that there is the importance of gaining expertise, and I think is it Daniel Kahneman who got a Nobel Prize in who said that in order to be truly considered an expert in a field, you need to have devoted around 10,000 hours of dedicated practice of that skill. And a lot of teachers may end up getting that amount of expertise, but it's completely different when it comes to education reform, because in education reform, as you mentioned, I think in the book, there isn't so much trial and error involved as there is in teaching.
Well, in practice, there's none at all, because or virtually none at all, because I think this Kahneman says it takes 10 to 20 years normally to prepare an education reform, a national education reform. And then if you want to evaluate what it brought, you have to wait another 10 to 20 years. That takes 12 years to go through school, and it takes time for the reform to settle. And then you have the old teachers that might not pay lip service to the new ideas and not teach according to them. So say you can make if you want to do this properly, every 20 to 40 years, you can implement the national school reform, education reform. And that's and most of them make education worse.
So it's basically the equivalent of having a 20 or 40-year plan.
Yeah. So if you want to wait until government gets it right, you should put your children into liquid nitrogen, and wait 2,000-3,000 years. Then maybe they get it right.
If you would like to see the full version of this premium video, please head over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe to gain full access to all of our premium content.